All right, everybody, now that we're done with the racing for the day, let's get into the bike test. Today, our bike test is the KTM 350 SXF, a bike that a lot of us here really enjoy riding, really enjoy testing. Racing that 350 platform is amazing. So, Ryan, give us the rundown on the 350 here.
Yeah, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time on the KTM 350 and just the 350 platform in general. End of last year, I found myself riding the Gas, and I just really wanted to get some kind of comparisons between the KTM and the Gas, and I've been having a ton of fun on this bike. A few things that I found pretty interesting between the 350, the 250, and the 450. Obviously, it kind of falls in that middle area, that kind of a no man's land. But what I found interesting is it weighs in about 2 pounds heavier than a 250F, but only 1 pound lighter than the 450. And what's interesting is the bike feels a lot lighter on track than that 2 pounds.
Yeah.
So to me, I thought that was really interesting. And then in the power department as well, KTM says that the 350 pumps out 57 peak horsepower, which is 10 more than the 250 and 6 less than the 450.
That's so much horsepower.
Oh, yeah.
For a stock bike and a claimed like 57 horsepower, that's enough.
Yeah, we're not running it on our dyno and doing, exactly comparisons, but this is what they say. So 6 less horsepower than a 450. And then obviously with the rest of the bike is the same as the 450 and the 250. WP exact fork and shock. The new frame. This is the new generation KTM, a little bit stiffer than it was in the past. No huge updates or changes for 2024, but this bike is just still a super solid platform. When I went into riding this bike, I kind of felt like, hey, maybe it's just a smaller, toned down 450. Obviously, looking at the numbers, it looks on paper closer to the 450 than it does to the 250.
Yeah.
But what I noticed is this bike is a little bit more like a big bore, a bigger 250 rather than a smaller 450, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
You still kind of have to ride this bike, like you have to rev it and carry your speed a little bit more than you would on a 450, where you can just lug it around, ride it in third gear all the time. I feel like you have to shift it a little bit more to ride the 350. It wants to be revved and carry your speed a little bit more like that. You can still ride it maybe a gear high, but you're going to want to use the clutch and shift it a little bit more than you would on the 450.
Yeah.
It still has the 2 map switch standard. It has a standard map and an aggressive map. We liked the aggressive map just because it does give it a little more juice and makes it feel a little bit more like a 450. But yeah, I agree. A super fun bike to ride. We've had it on loan to a couple of our test riders, and I feel like every time I call for it, I'm like, hey, I need to borrow this bike again.
They're not answering that phone call.
They ignore me. Yes, every time. And,
it's so fun.
Yeah, everyone that gets this bike is definitely wants to keep it. Where our guy Bubba Warren, pro mountain bike racer, raced the Day in the Dirt and actually won the Open Expert division on this bike. So
good job, Bubba. But pick up our call. When we call you, you have to answer so we can get our bike back.
Well, I got some inside information that by riding this bike for so long, he actually put a deposit on a new one because he knows I'm coming to get that thing back.
He's like, I can't be without this bike if you're taking it back.
One of the things we talked about when he was racing this bike a bunch is that, there are some advantages and disadvantages, I feel like, with racing a 350. And obviously not everyone wants to be a racer, but racing the 350, you obviously have to race either the Open division or the 450. So you're kind of
lie and cheat.
Yeah, you're not exactly bringing a knife to a gunfight, because I feel like this bike does have a lot of advantages aside from just being lower on power. Even a track that local tracks that might be a shorter layout or a more tighter layout, you don't necessarily need the 450. I mean, even in the Arena Cross series, like we talked about earlier, you're seeing a lot of guys, they only race the 250F. They don't even ride a 450 because it's not needed. So on a tighter track, maybe if that's your local, then the 350 actually has a little bit of an advantage. But even on something where a track like Glen Helen, where we rode on this bike, where horsepower is, king, it's the must have, you're not going to get as tired riding the 350 maybe as you do on the 450, because, it is that 2 pound difference, but it feels so much different when you're riding. This bike feels like a 250F with a little bit of extra juice to it. So
yeah, your description of that, you have to kind of like ride a little more aggressively to get the power out of it. I describe that as you get to ride the bike more aggressively to get the power out of it and get it to perform. Because on a 450, once you start doing that, it's serious time. Like if you're not on your game, you're going to get thrown out for a loop on a 450. You're going to get more tired. You're going to be faced with more consequences when things go wrong. And the 350 lets you use like more of the potential of the bike. 250s make you even use more of the potential of the bike. But the 350 is like such a nice balance because you can still be a little bit lazy on it.
Yeah.
To get away with stuff. You don't have to try 100% all the time.
Yeah, and I feel like when you ride a 250F, if you're going to be somebody that wants to race this bike, And maybe you're a bigger guy that wants, I want a 450, but you're like,
Yeah.
maybe the 450 is too much juice for me and it's too, I'm worried I'm going to get hurt. So I'm going to ride a 250F. Well, then if you ride a 250F, then maybe you're going to be ringing that thing out too much and you're going to be, now you got to deal with maintenance intervals a lot more. And you want the usability of the 450 because maybe you're a little bit easier on it and you're like, I don't have to do as many rebuilds because I'm not bouncing this thing on the limiter so much. The 350 is a really nice compromise. And, we titled the story, The Displacement Replacement. And I think that really goes to show like how versatile this bike is and just the amount of conditions you can ride it in and still have a lot of fun.
It's a great seller for the KTM brand and the KTM group, especially the XC models with a little bit larger tank, handguards, different transmission, 18-inch rear wheel, kickstand, that kind of stuff. That bike is an amazing race bike for any off-road series and a heck of a good motocross bike too. So the 350 SXF, you want a motocross focused one, man, it every time you ride it, you're like, this is all you need ever. So
yeah, it's definitely a good
great bike.
all-around bike. Though maybe the one bike I would actually purchase for myself to have one bike only. But yeah, you guys feel free to check out the Cycle News magazine where you can see a full review of this bike. We're more in-depth, more up-close photos, spec sheet, pricing, all that. So you can check all that out in the Cycle News magazine this week.